There. So we're live now. Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Ranjit Anipul, co-founder of BeWasteWise. And before getting into introductions, let me start with some housekeeping. The panel is live now. To interact with the panelists, you can use the live chat window on our website at wastewise.be, or you can also tweet to us at BeWasteWise, or use the hashtags Food Waste and 2014 GDW. We have two of our panelists, Professor Adam Reed from Ricardo AEA and Dr. Tim Evans from Tim Evans Environmental with us. Professor Adam Reed is the Practice Director of Waste Management Resource Efficiency at Ricardo AEA. Dr. Tim Evans has done some wonderful research on and published some wonderful research on food waste disposals. So to start with, Professor Reed, would you like to go with your introduction and your experience with food waste disposals?
Yeah, thank you, Ranjit. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here on a new platform for me, so this is quite an interesting exercise. I've been an environmental consultant and academic for about 20 years now. I've specialised in waste management, mainly municipal, solid and commercial industrial waste management. Over that time, a lot of our work has been around large infrastructure development, supporting municipalities globally around the decision making about collection and treatment solutions and services. And I suppose from a perspective around the organic stream and this debate specifically, I've had a number of the manufacturers over the last 5 or 6 years come and test their solutions both in my house and within the workplace, because they're keen to put this type of solution into the UK market. I mean, as an aside, I grew up in the 1970s. I lived in a house that had an incinerator or a macerator. I'm quite used to the concept as an operational exercise, but I think it's the political, social dynamic. It's about the branding of it as a solution, and possibly it's about the barriers to market entry in terms of waste management that I think we can debate more about today, because I think it does make sense, but it may not be the answer in the near future because of some of those issues. So looking forward to some questions and some lively debate.
Dr. Tim, you're...
Okay. Well, I trained as a soil scientist in Newcastle upon Tyne and Madison, Wisconsin. So my interest is around soil, agronomy and sustainability. I first encountered the disposer when I was a postgrad student in Madison, when I rented an apartment one summer. I worked for Thames Water for 24 years. Part of that was creating environmentally controlled biosolids recycling for about 300 wastewater treatment works, serving in total about 6.5 million people. The UK water industry is organised on a river basin management basis. So for us, regional solutions are normal. So we have created sludge treatment centres. 80% of sewage sludge in the UK is treated by anaerobic digestion, with the biogas used as renewable energy, and more than 70% of biosolids are beneficially used on land. My second encounter with food waste disposers was at a conference in 2000, just after I'd become an independent consultant, at the European Biosolids and Organic Residuals Conference, and the professor there showed that food waste disposers were a good option. Subsequently, I followed the science. I discussed it with the European Commission, and in 2006 I was engaged by Worcestershire County Council to assess the environmental impact of their programme of encouraging disposers, and I found that the council saved a lot of money, and the global warming potential of that route was as good as curbside collection and treatment by anaerobic digestion, and better than composting, incineration or landfill. But I didn't know what the cost transfer to the wastewater treatment was. So in 2008, I visited a town in Sweden which offered citizens three choices. They could do home composting, they could do curbside collection, or they could have a disposal which they leased from the city. And the number of disposers increased from none to half the households in the municipality using them. And to my surprise, the systematic monitoring data at the wastewater treatment works showed that there was no change in flow or load at the treatment works, but they got 46% more biogas. So for the wastewater treatment works, it was a free lunch. They got clean biogas substrate. Subsequently, just recently, there's been a survey of that town. They've a CCTV survey of the sewers. They've looked at 10 kilometers of sewers, and they've found that there's no effect of operational significance on the sewers. So that's my experience in brief, and it looks like Michael has joined us.
Yes, Michael has joined us, and hello everyone. This is we also have our third panelist, Michael Kielman, with us. He's the manager of environmental engineering at InSinkErator, and InSinkErator is one of the largest sellers of food waste disposals worldwide. So, hi, we're going on with the introductions round, and would you like to start with your introduction and how you got involved with food waste disposals?
Sure. I came to InSinkErator about 7 years ago after spending nearly 20 years in the wastewater treatment profession here in the United States. InSinkErator wanted somebody to oversee their research on understanding how food waste disposers impact wastewater treatment, and then also wanted us to help to communicate that to the public. And so that's really what I do here.
That's very interesting. And so to start with, from what Tim explained, looks like food waste disposals are definitely good tools to solve both food waste problem and wastewater treatment problem. But why is there such a drastic difference in adoption when compared between US, the UK, and other developed nations? Anyone wants to take that question?
I'd love to take that question.
Sure.
I think the main reason is because the food waste disposer was invented in the United States, and during the baby boomer years of the 1950s and 60s, there was a big sales push within U.S. cities to market them, and they became popular.
That's interesting. Tim, I think you have some experience with some research experience with increased adoption of food waste disposals in one of the localities. Would you like to talk about that? How the adoption increased immediately, and what kind of impacts it had?
Well, I think that's probably a unique situation, this town in Sweden, where they went from no disposers to 50% of households using them. They sample the wastewater going into the treatment works every 4 weeks. It's a 24-hour composite sample, so it's a very good sample. And from those data, it appears that there was no increase in flow, so no increase in water use, which other people have found as well, but no increase in BOD, COD, nitrogen, or phosphorus. In fact, there were small decreases in the average, but they were not statistically significant. But there was this 46% increase in biogas, which is statistically significant at 99% confidence. So that is a remarkable finding for a field situation. I'm not aware of anywhere else that this has been done, although elements of it are consistent with other published research.
That's interesting.
Italy, Japan, several places.
That's interesting. Adam, do you have any views on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is there was quite a big uptake in both the UK and the Netherlands in the 80s with new building development. So as new housing streams came online in the 70s and 80s, they became quite a popular option as a means of modern living, let's call it. So a number of my peer group, because that's the era I grew up in, are quite at home with the concept. But what I found is that over time they kind of started to be taken out of households, either because they broke and weren't replaced, or because there was a cost incurred that was beyond the normal sink, or because new types of collection system are being introduced for food waste. And so actually, if you look at the housing stock of the UK today, then they're very uncommon, if you like, as a solution. And I think my biggest barrier for that loss of a system, if you like, is the water company, water treatment catchment area, management area is different from the municipal authorities responsible for collection. So you've got very different agencies running very different solutions, albeit the material may be very relevant to both. And it's actually a problem of how you interface those in terms of decision making. So what I think has happened is a good solution was here and it's gone because it didn't really suit the way that we had decision making set up in the way that catchment areas versus local government areas. And I think it's quite a lesson to be learnt there from the UK perspective.
That's very interesting. Michael, since you're a global company and you sell food waste disposals around the world, how does this existence of two different agencies for waste and wastewater treatment, how does that impact your business, or how do you deal with that?
That's a great point, great observation. In the States, I know there are a number of different arrangements where, in some cases, all three utilities are under one umbrella, where the municipal government has both the wastewater treatment and collection as well as energy. In other jurisdictions, they may be completely separate, where the wastewater treatment plant is under a district, say a sanitary district, under a and the collection system, on the other hand, is operated by the city. And without question, what happens is the people that perceive risk or are more concerned about additional costs, such as the collection system people, they really don't see as any potential gain in using disposers. Whereas the wastewater treatment plant folks would say, we want to incorporate resource recovery, we want to boost biogas production, we want to reduce our energy demand. But the collection system people, if they're not under the same jurisdiction, it can be a challenge.
Tim, any views on that?
Yeah, it's. I think also, Michael will be aware of a situation going on in Palo Alto in California right now, which I think kind of exemplifies this, that they have been lobbied by waste management companies who want them to buy their composting system or their digestion system or whatever, and yet apparently nearly every house in Palo Alto has a food waste disposer, and people don't realize that this is actually a route into recycling, just as a separate bin is a route into recycling. So there's that perception issue, and I think now the council is just starting to realize, hey, if everybody used their disposer, then we wouldn't need to do this separate collection. And they're also upgrading their wastewater treatment works with efficient anaerobic digestion, thermal hydrolysis, and the whole thing just becomes a much more sensible, integrated thing. And then, as Adam said, you've got to communicate to people that, hey, this is actually, it's not a disposer, it's a route into recycling.
Adam?
Yeah, it makes a very valid point right at the end there. I think, all the time the public has been led down this path that recycling is good, recycling is good, recycling is good. Suddenly to have a system where it's called a food waste disposer and it's going down the sink and that ends up somewhere, but I don't know where. I think there is a real communication challenge there. But I think the question I would ask is, given that local authorities in the UK and much of the rest of the world are driven by recycling targets, and a recycling bin full of recyclables can be weighed, and you can say 30%, 50%, 70%, thanks very much. How do we do that with the organic material that's going down the sink, so to speak? Is it recycling? Is it prevention because it never enters the bin, i.e. it's diverted from landfill? Or is there some kind of trade-off between, 100% of the material goes down the sink and 30% of it ends up as a solid at the back end of the disposal unit, the sewage treatment plant, for example? So therefore it's 70% contribution recycling. That may be a contributory factor to why we haven't embraced it as much as we could have done, because of the complicated nature of how we report recycling.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. We set up this sort of target-driven approach, and then we get completely stuck in accomplishing those targets. But if you start looking at participation in the scheme, then you might have issued loads of bins, but if many people will not participate, then the whole impact of the scheme is diminished. And can we step back and really look at what we're trying to accomplish? As Adam said, we're trying to accomplish diversion from landfill. Accomplishing the target is not really the objective. The objective is to divert from landfill. And yeah, it isn't 30% that ends up in the biosolids at the end of the day, because this material is so biodegradable. There's actually a very small contribution to the biosolids, but you're contributing carbon to the wastewater, and for our wastewater treatment, it is actually carbon limited. So for advanced wastewater treatment, people are having to buy methanol and acetic acid to actually add to their treatment process. Whereas, if they had enough ground food waste, then that problem is accomplished. You release the carbon limitation.
That's interesting. That's interesting. So, before the live broadcast started, Adam and Tim were talking about adoption of food waste disposals in cities that are being built now, and cities that have already been in existence, and how it can play a role in food waste diversion. Would one of you like to start with the differences in these cities and the age of the sewer system?
Well, I'll start, because I think Tim will then correct the world with the real answer. And I think what we have is, we have a perception that, let's take British or Western European sewage systems. They're generally quite old, they're considered to be at capacity, and the additional biological demand and loading from food waste from potentially hundreds of thousands of households could overload the system in such a way that not only do the pipes not work, but the sewage treatment facilities at the back end of those pipes would be overloaded. And I suppose that is one of the big debates that we've had in the UK particularly, is, do we want to have a major swing towards food waste disposal solutions where there's a concern that our system is already overloaded and therefore might not cope? If you add to that the debate about old versus new, I think these solutions, in my personal opinion, are ideally suited to new housing estates, new industrial developments, and particularly large new urban locations around the world. Take the Middle East, where there are cities being built in the desert, on a daily basis, 100,000 people plus all the time. Here's a perfect location to be building in not only efficient waste management, but efficient effluent and wastewater treatment and energy management. Because of course you could have energy generated at the back end from the AD plant feeding back into the system. That to me would be an efficient, very deliverable, very environmentally beneficial solution. I think the issue with the UK, and particularly our big cities, is that perceived risk of, could the system cope, and who manages that system, because that's not the waste industry.
That's interesting. Mike, views on that?
Well, there's no question that the perception by many of the risk-averse wastewater professionals is that there will be an overload of the system if everybody were to use disposers. But if you look at the infrastructure in the U.S., where in California, for example, Tim earlier mentioned Palo Alto, virtually 90 to 100% of the homes have a disposal. Now that is indeed newer infrastructure, to Adam's point. But if you think about it, wastewater treatment and collection really hasn't been around for all that long anyway. So the infrastructure in the UK and Europe isn't that different from, say, the eastern part of the US, where there is at least 50% of homes have a disposer. I think by and large, loadings from disposers is known, it's quantifiable, manageable, and the textbooks list this at about a 20% increase where disposers are used. And really this gets to your prior question. How waste actually goes down the disposer? We don't know. That's because it disappears, it never gets measured. And so even though newer disposers could probably process 100% of the food waste produced in a home, a reasonable number is about 75% of the food waste produced in a home could go down a disposer. We know that probably most people are not putting anywhere near that amount down. In fact, we're challenged. We're trying to determine just how much is going down a disposer by working in 5 different municipalities in the U.S. currently, where we're providing new users a disposer who have never had a disposer before, and we're measuring how much food waste is in the garbage prior to them getting a disposer, and then 6 to 12 months later going back in and determining what percentage of food waste is still in the garbage to see what kind of diversion level they're achieving. And quite frankly, I think most people just use their disposer for convenience. It's plate scraping. It's not really aggressive use of putting a lot of food waste down a disposer. So here again, coming around full circle, the risk aversion is that people will put everything down the disposer, but in reality, they're not putting a lot of material down the disposer.
That's interesting. Tim, do you have any views on that?
Yeah, it's. I mean, yes, the old sewer systems, the elderly sewer systems that Adam describes, they're hydraulically overloaded, or they're near their hydraulic capacity. So, but since disposers, I mean, lots of studies have shown that household water use doesn't actually increase when disposers are used, which is surprising, but that's what the studies find. So it's not changing the hydraulic load on the sewers. They're not solids limited, and the solids that come out of disposers are very easily transported in wastewater. They're as or more easily transported than fecal solids. You know, the impact on the sewers, on their age and so on, is actually irrelevant.
Yeah, let me just add to that. In reality, people think that disposers are putting solid food waste down the sewer, but 40% of those particles are smaller than 100 microns. So we're talking about, 60% are larger than 100 microns, but most of those particles are, 95% or so are smaller than 3 millimeters. So they are very easily transported in sewers.
All right. Okay, so considering the example that Tim has given about Palo Alto, where the waste management industry lobbied against food waste disposals, and considering what you mentioned, what Michael mentioned about the wastewater industry demanding for food waste to come through the sewers, is it? How does this? How does the? I'm just stuck. I forgot my question. Really sorry. But there seems to be this change in different interests between, this is a wastewater treatment facility, and then there is a waste industry, which is private, and most wastewater treatment facilities are probably public holdings. So how does that work with InSinkErator's business?
Is this question for me?
Yeah.
Actually, if the disposer had never been invented before, this would be the perfect time to invent it. Because of this trend to keep organics out of landfills and the trend in the wastewater industry of resource recovery. And I would say the public entities have a vested interest in actually reducing their energy demand and improving their energy footprint by using food waste disposers. And so this trend of resource recovery is why there are a number of utilities, at least here in the U.S., that are saying, you know what, we want people to use their disposers. So it's good for us. It's good for InSinkErator.
All right, and there still seems to be some uncertainty, certainly within Europe, regarding the impacts of food waste disposals. And so, what kind of research might be more beneficial to understand properly how and when to use food waste disposals in city planning, or maybe for individual households?
Well, I mean, if I jump in, I think an interesting development has been what Scotland have done with the zero waste regulations. I mean, they've tried to change the market for recyclables and the collection of organics by simply stating that businesses above a certain threshold and all households have to make their materials segregated at the curbside. And that's immediately driving investment in infrastructure like anaerobic digestion facilities. However, what I suppose a worrying downside of that is actually they're saying to all the hotels who are above the threshold, you can't use your in-house solutions, your InSinkErators and your treatment systems, because that doesn't count as segregated at the curbside. So in Scotland, they're actually kind of turning their back on this solution completely by saying, no, it needs to be at the curbside because we're going to collect it. If we don't collect it, it doesn't count, and therefore you're effectively breaking the rules. And I think this is quite an interesting development for the hospitality sector, the food and drink sector, who are the sectors in the UK who still are using this type of technology on site within their own environment because it makes sense to them. And I think this is an area where we need to start to look at it much more closely, because what's happening in the hospitality sectors elsewhere around the world? Because the UK can't live in isolation, Scotland in particular can't live in isolation, setting policies and rules which effectively are saying you can't use this technology because we think anaerobic digestion is right. Well, as Tim rightly says, this material is being anaerobically digested. It's just getting there through a sewage pipe rather than on the back of a lorry, which we all know generates plenty of methane and carbon dioxide, and you might question the scientific carbon value of doing it that way. So all in all, I think, you know, there's been some really punchy legislation in Europe recently, Scotland being a good example, but it could be having unforeseen consequences that are undermining the debate, and I'm worried that we're not, you know, we don't have the kind of evidence sitting there for certain sectors or certain regions that say, have we asked the right question yet? So I think there's plenty more debate to be had.
That's interesting, Michael.
Well, it's not new. We have heard for communities that do curbside collection, source-separated organics collection, that they see disposers as competition to that. And what I would say is that if the overall goal is to keep the food waste out of the landfills and to reduce the carbon footprint, then all tools should be made available in, you know, whether it's the hospitality sector or residential sector. You know, it's exclusionary to say you can only do this one system or another, and why not use all the tools in the toolbox?
That's right. Tim, any comments on what kind of research aspects need to be looked at deep?
Well, yeah, I agree. You know, use all the tools in the box. Part of the analysis of the data that I collected indicated that it was the biofilms on the walls of the sewers that were doing some of the treatment, and I think that would be a very interesting area for research. We have a very poor understanding of the biochemistry of these biofilms, these slime layers. There has been some research. We know that the microbial composition varies from place to place because we've done DNA profiling of these biofilms, but we don't know what they do. We don't know how they respond to the wastewater flowing past them. So that's a whole interesting area of fairly pure research. As to the sustainability and all that stuff, well, I think a lot of that is known if people choose to read the literature. If they don't read the literature, well, you know, they're going to remain in ignorance and just have their prejudices. I think Philadelphia is probably an interesting case where they're encouraging people to use their disposers, and Michael will know a lot more about that than I do. But Philadelphia is also interesting because they have opted for green infrastructure for managing their stormwater. So rather than doing big heavy engineering, they're planting rain gardens and green roofs and all sorts of things to stop the rain rushing straight into the sewers and overloading these pipes that we have in the ground. So Philadelphia is doing a lot of very good things on an integrated basis. It's not maybe selling stuff for engineering companies, but it's a good solution for its citizens.
That is interesting. Tim, views on that? I'm sorry, Michael. Tim says you know a little bit more about Philadelphia and what it's doing. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, they. I think they invested over $50 million in their anaerobic digesters and cogeneration at their wastewater treatment plant. And they're looking at disposers as a way of reducing their solid waste collection and disposal costs. And if they're increasing the renewable energy at the treatment plant, it's kind of a win-win. So they're looking at it for both environmental and economic reasons. And it's certainly much easier to take advantage of the existing nearly 50% owners of disposers without having to invest in a green bin program or a source-separated organics collection program. They can simply do messaging and public education and outreach to say, hey, why don't people use their disposer more and help save the city money and reduce our carbon footprint and increase the renewable energy at our treatment plant. We get the most payback from our investment.
That is interesting. All right. So also coming to the research and policy side of the debate, what kind of cost, benefit, and life cycle analysis are required to increase the usage of food waste disposals worldwide?
Well, we did a life cycle assessment through CDM Smith and PE Internationals about 4 years ago, and we looked at using a disposer and 8 different types of wastewater treatment plants and compared that to landfilling, composting, and incineration, and found that disposers and wastewater treatment is always lower in global warming potential than any of those other schemes. Now, from a primary energy demand, if you have anaerobic digestion and you're creating energy and you're beneficially reusing the biosolids as fertilizer, you actually have the lowest primary energy demand as well. So for those treatment plants or those cities that have treatment with AD and they're beneficially reusing biosolids, they should be encouraging the disposers. It's a pretty simple analysis. It doesn't take much to look at the numbers on the generation for a particular city and what type of infrastructure you have. In fact, we developed a model that allows us to put city-specific data in, and we can, depending upon their infrastructure, determine what their environmental footprint is using disposers or composting or landfilling or incineration.
That is interesting. Tim or Adam, do you have any comments on that?
I think, as Adam said, it's just a pity these things say disposer on them. Because they're not disposers. It goes somewhere. It goes into the wastewater system, and then there is recycling after that. So, you know, it's messaging. We've got to get over the message that, hey, this isn't disposal. This is just diversion. It's a tool in the box.
Incinerator or carburetor, also there are other names that are used to refer to. They sound good, considering this comment. Adam, any views on that? Research and policy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think food waste disposer is accurate to a point, but is the wrong branding for a modern world. I think garbage gobbler doesn't help. That sounds terribly industrial, but that's the one I had when I grew up. And I certainly think something called a macerator scares the living daylights out of my grandmother. So whatever we do, we got to ensure that not only is it the brand names are appropriate, but also they do represent the opportunity here. This is organic waste processing. This is a one-stop shop for food waste treatment. This is easier than putting it in your box. I mean, I'd love to write the campaign. Whoever decides to push this forward, I'm your man for the PR. But I mean, I do think great opportunities here. But to come back to your question about sort of the life cycle analysis and the data, the more data we can get from cities like Philadelphia and the Swedish example and such like, where we can show some clear numbers that say, look at the uptake, look at the money we've saved by not having to run the vehicles, etc. UK and Western European decision makers are pretty simplistic folk. If it's going to save their money and have at least the same greenhouse gas benefit, if not more, then the chances are they're going to buy one. And I think once you get a couple of authorities, I think the study that Tim was involved in with Worcestershire was interesting, because at the time I kind of felt that we might have turned the corner. One good piece of work, an authority trialling some stuff. It only takes one more authority to go, hang on, that adds up. I'll have some of that. Before you know it, you've got a whole trend happening, and I think that's what we need. We need a little bit of example that just says, here you go, the data's robust. It's not being sold to you by a manufacturer. Here's an independent consultant or an academic. It's a study of a couple of locations. Look, the data speaks for itself. And I think this is like no other technology innovation in the waste sector at the moment. Gasification, pyrolysis, they've both been working in other sectors for a very long time. Can you get them into the municipal waste management market? Can you help? They're taking years to get data to prove to decision makers that they're safe and they're a good investment. And I think, incinerators and food waste disposal units are a bit similar. They're kind of things that do work and people can kind of remember them. But if you're making an investment decision today, you want to know that it works on day one and it's going to be cheaper and it's going to be environmentally sound. And I think some good data from some interesting international case studies will just help an interesting, innovative, entrepreneurial municipality in England go, hey, I've got to save 20% of my operating budget in the next 5 years because we live in a world of austerity measures, and maybe the garbage gobbler, the food waste disposal unit, could save me having to close schools and hospitals, because it's actually going to mean I don't run 25 vehicles collecting food waste when I've already got an infrastructure that's ready-made for that material. And I think get one authority to do it, and I think you could see a big upturn in interest. But until you get a UK authority doing it, it doesn't matter what Philadelphia are doing, because that's just interesting. It needs to be somebody in the UK that kind of has to make the leap of faith. And Worcestershire were kind of on the journey. And I think that's the next step, is somebody's got to go there with enough data to say, hang on, this makes sense, let's make it rock. So I'm looking forward to what happens in the next year or two. Somebody's going to have to make a decision. Even maybe a bit of government support to say, come on guys, we're all trying to save money and save the environment. I want a pilot project. We've done pilot projects on incentives, on curbside recycling, on different collection frequencies, the colour of your bin, your bag, your box. Maybe we need a bit of government incentive to say, I want to try this somewhere because I really want some local data. Maybe that's what's missing.
Yeah.
That's interesting that you mentioned that you compared food waste disposals with gasification and pyrolysis. But on the hierarchy of waste management, food waste disposal seem to come much higher, near anaerobic digestion, where you can have both energy and material recovery, and as compared to gasification and pyrolysis, and they seem to be a smaller public investment in the technology, in one single technology. Considering these two, why don't we see enough about food waste disposals in the mainstream waste management research? Or why is that so? Or Michael, do you want to answer that?
I think traditionally food waste disposers have been sold as an appliance of convenience, and it just helps people clean up their kitchen. There's less smells, it's more hygienic, and this strategy of using disposers as an environmentally responsible tool to keep food waste out of landfills and to accomplish resource recovery is a fairly recent thing. It's a fairly recent trend. I just, to Adam's point, there are a number of countries that are doing their own studies. They often want to do their own studies. They don't want to listen to what somebody else did. They want to do their own. But there's been studies done from Sydney, Australia to Utanabori, Japan. You know, there's studies going on certainly now in the U.S. But Tim, you might want to comment on what's going on in the U.K. right now. There's a couple of studies going on that's being supported by the local governmental association, where, in fact, Adam, these cities do want to do their own studies and find out just how much it's going to save their community.
That is interesting. So what you're saying is food waste disposals have been marketed as a solution to kitchen, everyday kitchen work, and not really as a sustainability solution or a climate change solution, for example. All right. So we have only 5 minutes to end the panel. So let's start. So this will be the last question, and let's start this with Mr. Tim. There still is some discussion, some debate about how good food waste disposals are. And what do each one of you think are the biggest or the strongest arguments against food waste, and how do you answer them? Tim, do you want to start?
I don't actually know an argument against them.
Okay.
I mean, I've looked and I can't find an argument against. And I've kept asking people at conferences, do you have any evidence against them? Send me evidence. And nobody has ever risen to that challenge. Nobody has ever sent me any evidence. It's just, I think the limitation that Adam keeps coming back to is communication. And for people to understand the whole sustainability agenda. That's the issue.
That is interesting.
And people don't understand wastewater either, and they need to understand that. The wonder of wastewater. You go into a wastewater treatment works, you see all this stuff coming in, you see clean water going out. We've talked about biogas, we've talked about biosolids recycling, nutrient recovery. A fantastic story, but people don't understand it because we don't communicate with them. So communication is really, really crucial.
That's interesting. Michael, do you want to go next?
Well, I'll be the devil's advocate, and I'll say the biggest thing I often hear is that disposers use water. And water conservation is a big deal, especially in areas like the Western Australia or the desert southwestern U.S. But as Tim said earlier, disposers really only use about 1% of the daily household amount of water. It's only about 1 gallon per person per day, so it's not a huge amount. However, it's a concern to people that use disposers. So I would just list that as the #1 concern because I hear it so often.
All right.
So that would be
but the field studies don't confirm that, do they, Michael?
Well, actually,
when people have measured, they don't confirm that.
We've got 10 different studies that quantify it at about 1 gallon per person per day, or about 1% or less. So it's about a toilet flush per person, per day. It's not a lot of water. So yeah, the studies don't confirm, or they do confirm that water use is insignificant, I guess.
Yeah. All right, that's interesting. Okay, Adam.
Well, I think for me, to add to the list, I think the biggest barrier for me will be political structures and decision-making remits. So water companies and the water sector operates at a certain scale with certain boundaries and catchment areas. Waste management is operated at a local level. Decision-making may be at a regional level or a sub-regional level. Until we get some holistic, joined-up thinking, and I think Philadelphia is a good example of that. Swedish cities, where they've got control over multiple utilities, shows you can overcome that. But all the time we've got the political decision-making structures that we have in the UK, we're not making it easy for these things to be part of the solution because they don't fit with that kind of misaligned infrastructure decision-making groupings. So until we get that right, this is always going to be a hard process for a municipality to support as a large-scale solution. And it really needs to be a large-scale solution because this is not something that a new housing estate, it's not the answer if it's only at that level. It needs to be, the entire municipal fabric. both commercial and industrial, then we've got, you know, something that can really change the world. But the way we're structured at the moment, that's not easy.
So you're saying it has to be linked with the sewage treatment plant and the infrastructure that's existing there too?
Personally, I think so, because that's where you're seeing the win-win. You're seeing the double benefits. And that's the scale where I think this kind of infrastructure makes sense for investment. And it certainly allows you to present some very large potential benefits in terms of the decision-making process. So that's where I think we need a bit more attention in the UK, certainly.
And I think that applies everywhere, to get the integration of all these sectors, and it applies to the rainwater management as well. But when everybody's pulling together, the highways, the parks, the wastewater treatment, everybody is pulling together. So all the actors need to pull together for a sustainable future.
That's, well, let's hope something like that happens with more research and communications on food waste disposal. They do seem to be good options for food waste disposal and wastewater treatment. So I think with this we can end the panel here. But before we go, I thought I would also like to mention some work in developing countries. Until now, we've discussed majorly about US and the UK. I actually came across a person called TJ Culhane, who actually carries a food waste disposal with him to developing countries where he works, and uses it to grind food waste and kind of make biogas for cooking uses right there in those small huts and households that he works with. So I thought that's something interesting. So there are applications even in developing countries, and some opportunity for knowledge transfer. So I hope you had you liked the discussion and would like to stay involved with e-waste once on the long run. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ranjit.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.